Stewardship is a path of many steps. The steps that woodland owners take are linked to their goals, values, and their vision for their land. In Baldwin, Maine, northwest of Sebago Lake, a community of woodland owners is taking shape.
First saw it in '63, and then we made the purchase in late spring of 1964. The literature was 135 acres, more or less, the description of it. But as the surveyor continued working and the chain of title was developed, it seemed that in reality it was much closer to 185 acres. It was young woods. The front of the house where the brook goes around was an alder thicket. We could see Sebago Lake just standing in the backyard. And so it was very young, growing back from what had been a pretty heavy commercial forestry project, cutting. I named it Heath Umbrage. Some people have interpreted that various ways, but my interpretation was that having been cut over, it was a wasteland, and also this is the headwater of Heath Brook. A number of tributaries bisect the property, and so there was the heath, and umbrage was giving shade, causing shade, and so I thought this was a wasteland that was giving shade from the regrowth of the trees.
I mean, this property has always been the focal point of my family. It is probably no exaggeration to say that the reason I was born and the reason I exist was as the intended future custodian of this property. Like, it is literally my mission in life. And I don't know if it's because I was raised that way or just of the inherent appeal and meaningfulness of the property to me, but it's very much, very much a part of my soul. I mean, the land in our family, maybe the best way to describe it's almost more of a religion than geography. It is a way of life. It just sort of permeated every, the way we structured our year and our activities and everything we believed in and everything that we did, was very much anchored to this land. It was very much, so it's very much a part of my soul.
My father had like 300 acres or so of land, and we pastured all the way through to where we've built our home there. That was some of our pasture land that he purchased in 1943. The timber on this lot probably started growing in about the 1930s. This is called the Duroshi orchard. That's what I always knew it as growing up as a kid around here. My neighbor who has the apple orchard, this was owned by a person in Massachusetts, about 200 acres, and he and I bought this land and then we split it. We had the logger do some timber harvesting. We paid him back as we harvested wood here, and then we ended up having a small mortgage. So we still have trees left, thank goodness. A lot of people own timberland for recreation, for their own privacy, for maybe a wildlife preserve. Maybe they would like to be able to watch wildlife. Maybe they'd like to build their house back in a secluded spot and have land all around them. Some people purchase timberland for the intrinsic value of holding it for family, and a lot of it is owned for production of income over a long period of time. This property is wide open for many recreational uses. We allow horseback riding, cross-country skiing, snowmobiling in certain areas, although this trail does not lead to any place where a snowmobile would want to go, but the whole property is wide open for people for unlimited access as far as walking, hiking, and cross-country skiing.
I like the aesthetics of it. It's very calming. Whenever I feel bad or don't know what to do, I like being able to go out in the woods. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm going to have my knees fixed, so that I can keep going, so I can go out there again. There are places out there that I walk that I know of, and a few big rocks that I love to sit on, and it just makes you feel better. This land itself, I think this is a very special piece of land. It has places that they're just wonderful. I can't even describe them.
Income isn't my only objective. I want the area to be good for wildlife, and so I've had the work done in consideration of sometimes improving the quality of habitat. Variety of wildlife that's here in these Saddleback Hills are pretty good to begin with. We have bobcat and bear, moose, deer, most of the weasel family in the area.
Expanding the use of trails and the use of cross-country obstacles as a site for fox hunting. And that's an area where I do have some experience, from the equestrian activities, where people do band together and make all of their land available and sort of manage it collaboratively so that it can be used for trail riding and for fox hunting and the equestrian disciplines. And then I also, have an interest in a little bit more of an agricultural use, sustainable, like a little bit, on a subsistence sort of scale, growing more of your own produce and livestock and food and that kind of thing.
In this area here, my objective to grow trees would be white pine if I can. This is a formerly improved land here. This was old fields, old farmland many years ago. It was pastured, and it grew up to a pretty solid block of white pine back in the 1940s and 50s. And over the years, it's had several cuttings before I purchased this property. And so it's a mixture of beech and oak and white pine. And in the future, I want to see oak and white pine in the understory.
We highly recommend using a forest management plan because it's good to put your goals on paper and have a discussion about what the condition of your forest is, what your goals are, plan on paper how you're going to get there, and maybe even talk about what the potentials are for income and those sorts of things ahead of time, and then have that in black and white to work off of when the harvester shows up. That way it helps minimize the confusion between the landowner, the forester, and the harvester about what the eventual goals are and what the expectations should be.
A forester will come onto your woodlot and talk with the landowner. And if you want to hire the forester to write a management plan for you, the forester will look at the whole woodlot and divide it into all the different stands of timber that are growing on the property. He will make recommendations, and he will write about all the different species that are in every one of those stands. He will look at the timber growth, he'll look at how the trees are growing and what the health is, and he'll also make an inventory and tell you how much is growing there and when it ought to be thinned in the future. And most importantly, he'll give you dates or a timeline for the future when projects need to be done. If you wanted to thin your white pine on a seed year when the trees are dropping their seeds, so that you scarify the white pine seed into the soil to help the regeneration of white pine onto your woodlot. He can make recommendations for that.
I like to really listen to what the landowner's interested in. It's not always management of timber in terms of earning income. Sometimes they're interested in wildlife or improving other aspects of their forest for their recreational opportunities or things like that. And I like to really listen to what they're interested in and try and create a plan or maybe a harvest plan that works for them but also benefits their forest in other ways.
The first management plan we did was in 1985. Again, with the idea that this was still young forest. The early work was mostly harvesting firewood and pulpwood.
Trying to figure out where to start in forest management can be pretty daunting. That's one of the things I'm here for as your district forester. We're really your free forestry resource here in Maine. I'm your tax dollars at work. Truly, you've already paid for the service. You might as well use it. And what I can do is come out and help you wrap your brain around what's happened on your lot. Our focus tends to be on goal setting. And one of the most important parts of your forest management plan is, what do you want to do with your forest? It's yours, and you need to decide what your suite of goals are. Once we pick your goals, I can use my forestry education to try and figure out where your forest is at this point in time, and then talk to you generally about what we can recommend to do to your forest over time to take it from where it is to meet your goals in the eventuality.
I'm firmly committed to working with a forester. I think that the land has benefited, I've benefited in general, but I've worked with more than one. You get different ideas, somewhat different approaches from it, but I think the advantage to having a forester working with you is such that it makes it virtually an essential to continue to have the kind of work done that you really would be happy that you've done.
Well, first we got together and walked his boundary lines and kind of talked about what he'd been doing in the past and where he wants to go with what he has and what he can develop out of it. And then we kind of talked about some of the issues that he has, water quality issues, forest health issues, and what we can do to improve that or correct those issues through this program. And then we actually got on the ground and laid out those projects and designed them and put them in the plan and submitted that for approval.
What we want to do is to have some crop tree release, do some thinning, influence what's going to be coming up in the understory in terms of species.
So they've marked this one.
Yes.
Why this one?
I think what they have to do is get enough access down here for the operation. We're going to take off the trees that are shading the understory for the release of the red oak down there, but they have to get there.
Oh, okay.
So I think they're just taking a...
So it's not so much the board length or the composition of this particular tree.
Itself, it's where it is.
It's the effect it's going to have on the surrounding.
One of the benefits of using a forest management plan is it can provide a future benefit or a benefit for future generations, in that long-term planning tends to lead to long-term land tenure. If you've got a 20 or a 40 or 100-year plan for your property and you're working that as you go, that's going to trickle down into the next generation and the next generation, and you'll have this series of historical documents where they can look back and see what's happened, what were we trying to achieve, what was Grandpa's vision for this land, and are we still on the same track?
Well, I have the privilege of learning from probably one of the best. I mean, my father is a humble, not particularly famous, but an extraordinary wildlife biologist and entomologist his entire career. So I had a very strong, sort of science background informally growing up. So he understands the biology and the ecology of an ecosystem like this one probably as well as anyone there is. And so he has understood, I think, as well as any of the foresters or any of the consultants, with whom he consults, the nature of the species and the interplay between them, and the various types of biomes and the progression of the forest naturally, and how to contribute to that and maximize that and optimize it without working against it or creating problems that you haven't anticipated, thinking that you're doing the right thing in the short term. So it comes to me with sort of all of that background. I don't know that I could improve that much upon it. I'd like to understand better, like, the specifics of it, why this particular species of tree, why, this particular type of understory, why you want to, cut at certain times versus others. My own personal preference trends towards the older growth, so I probably need to be reminded of like what needs to be thinned and when to promote the future tree growth that you and mix of species that you want.
The best forest management plans are living documents. They're dynamic, just like forests. Forests change over time. There are unforeseen conditions. Sometimes they're natural conditions, sometimes they're market conditions, sometimes they're social conditions. Things happen within families that own woodlots. And ideally, a forest management plan is a document that can be continuously updated to meet new goals or new objectives.
For my own personal preference, I would love to. I would keep it largely as you see here. I would expand the open space a little bit within its historical confines, what I consider to be its historical confines. And I guess when you talk about historical, how far back do you want to go? At one point it was all old growth forest. At one point it was all cleared pasture. But I would keep the open spaces that are here from the sort of historical farmsteads and expand those to make it a very small sort of working horse farm. Someday I would love to have like a nonprofit that focused on reclaiming at-risk horses and rehoming them. And so to make it more of a working equestrian property, maybe a little bit of a sustainable farm with the organic produce and various types of livestock just to keep life interesting. So I would diversify a little bit in its uses and maybe a little bit more mix between open space. But, largely the forest, that you see here in pretty much the same vein.
The reason that a landowner and a forester might get together and discuss a management plan is because of the long-term relationship that would be grown between the landowner and the forester. If the forester writes a management plan that meets the objectives and incorporates the objectives of the landowner into the management plan, then they have a document that'll go ahead for years, and it'll form a bond between the landowner and the forester whereby they can work many different projects from timber harvesting to maybe weeding and thinning the woodlot. But it's something that'll go on for many years to come.
Working with Vin has been enjoyable. Vin's a very knowledgeable guy. He is a retired professor, so he really knows his stuff, and I enjoy walking the woods with Vin and talking about what's out here and what he's interested in.
I think one of the big misconceptions about using a forest management plan is that someone is going to come, maybe at your behest, but tell you what you have to do with your property. And a point that I try and drive home for landowners all the time is you don't have to do anything with your forest. It's about what you want to do with your forest, what your goals are, and your forester should help you achieve those goals. The forester works for you, not the other way around.
There are assistance programs available to the landowner in helping them manage the property. There are forest stewardship plans and there are woodland resource action plans which will set parameters and give the landowner a whole lot of information and advice on how to manage their woodlot for the long term. You can talk to the state forester or a consulting forester, and they might tell you to check out different programs that the Natural Resource Conservation Service has or that the Maine Forest Service has in helping you prepare a management plan for your land in order for you to make a really good management plan of your land, which would cover mapping crews of the property to find out how much timber value you have on the land, the types of trees, the species of trees, the quality of the trees. It also addresses wildlife, and it also addresses soils and water and fish management and wildlife management. So it the cost share plans are very comprehensive plans.
Vin came to me and asked to meet with me and talk about forest planning, and we took a walk on his lot and talked about his objectives and what he was interested in doing and furthering his management.
So the road that we're standing on, I applied to the Natural Resource Conservation Service. There was a program a few years ago of assisting the landowner in building trails and building access road. So this road here is an actual heavy truck haul road. There wasn't any road here. We had to cut the road out. We did some thinning to help pay for the road at the same time to gather in some timber money. And this goes uphill, which we'll walk up to a landing site. We haven't used the landing site yet, but in the future we will for future harvests of timber on this lot. It cuts down our skid distance and it's at the landing site is at the base of a mountain, about a half a mile from here. So it allows us to bring the timber to that area without it costing a lot of money for diesel fuel and less rutting of the land and disruption less of the land.
Some of the issues, having such a large property on such a steep slope creates a lot of water quality concerns. It creates erosion concerns. Planning of trails and landings has to be done very carefully. And management of storm runoff and controlling water on the property is one of the biggest concerns.
We have a riprap spillway here. Water just slowly seeps down across the hillside, and rather put in a culvert that would totally plug up with leaves where the water doesn't move very much, the Natural Resource Conservation Service recommended that we put in riprap and allow the water to run through. This was a very soft area here. We put some fabric down underneath about a foot of gravel that we put on top. This is the gravel we put down is like a 3-inch crushed gravel. It's a little more than recommended, but it's has made a really, really nice road.
Well, what I usually ask people that I'm just finding out own some woodland is whether they're in tree growth, because I believe I would have been hard-pressed to maintain the land I've had from any kind of income that it produced directly. But the tree growth tax law has been a very great advantage to me in being able to hold on to the land and manage it at the very low intensity that I've done for the most part.
When I was a kid and everyone else had paper routes, I would get paid by my dad $1 a tree to help prune the pine trees up to 17 feet, which is a board length or so. And you use the bow saw as far as you could reach to arm level, and then the pole saw to extend maybe to 10 feet, and then the ladder with the bow saw for the rest. But that would make your clear, board length straight pine, and that would make them more valuable. But
when a landowner enrolls their land in tree growth, they have to have the objective of commercially harvesting timber off that property for the long term. It's not every year that they have to do that, but they have to follow a management plan that a forester writes. The management plan has to be written every 10 years, or at least checked and by a forester every 10 years to see if the landowner is in compliance with his tree growth management plan. This property that you see here behind me has been in tree growth for 20 years. Once your woodlot is in tree growth, it's in forever until you pay the penalty to take the woodlot out of the tree growth plan. When someone purchases a piece of property that is in tree growth, they have 1 year to re-enroll the property in the tree growth. And they can use the previous forester's plan, or if that plan is run out, then they will need to have a new management plan performed on the woodlot. And a management plan has to be done every 10 years, and the forester has to go out and look at the woodlot and recertify it every 10 years for the landowner.
I think ideally the relationship between the landowner, the forester, and the logger is sort of a chain link where the forester and the landowner link arms on one side of the equation and talk about goals and planning. And then on the other side, the forester links arms with the logger and they take the woods together. The best results I've seen on a harvest are when loggers get involved early and they're there during the planning stage. Maybe they see some of the marking, they have some input on how trails are laid out and where yards are going to be, things like that. Oftentimes your best resource is the guy that operates the giant piece of equipment, to work with the forester to explain exactly what his needs are going to be before the layout starts.
The trees we are selecting are based primarily by the trees we're leaving. A lot of the trees in here are early successional species. They're aspen, they're birch. They're short-lived and they probably won't live too much longer. So while we're in here releasing the red oak, we're going to take out some of these poor quality trees. Primarily, we look at the crown of the tree. We decide how much room it needs to develop and what needs to come out to give it a little bit more room to photosynthesize, expand their crown, and increase their growth rate. The good trees in here are primarily red oak and white pine. In Maine, they have a pretty strong market, so we're going to grow them. They're good wildlife trees. So we're trying to regenerate those as well as release the ones that are the healthy.
But my general advice to landowners is to work with a forester. Most of the licensed foresters have working relationships with a suite of loggers with different components of equipment, and they'll be able to fit the right logger to your job. The other advice I give to landowners is to go out and take a look at a few logging jobs. If you're going to bring someone in to work on your property, you want to see what their last job looks like. And in general, I tell folks, if you talk to a logger and they're not, just champing at the bit to take you out and show you something they're really proud of, it's probably a pretty big red flag.
The loggers have been pretty good. I think has gotten better more recently with the increasing age of the forest and more hardwood that's quality for saw logs, better income produced from this. I felt that during some of the early work, the woods roads that I had deteriorated, partly because maybe the work being done in winter was difficult to get access at times. Particularly, we had some early thaws, and then the ground was soft, and so it lost some road access that had been pretty well preserved in the past. So I'd like to get back, maybe not just to that point, but extend the road access that we have somewhat beyond that.
One of the biggest concerns is the control of water and during a timber harvest, and maintaining the quality of the trails and maintaining the areas that are being used over and over, and trying to prevent erosion, and even correcting some erosion problems that were created here in past harvests. And really managing the stormwater runoff here and utilizing best management practices to do that.
What's good about the Baldwin Woods Forum is we get a lot of different people from different walks of life out here looking at the woodlot. It doesn't make any difference what you're really looking at, but just get a day to get outside and trade information and work on this peer-to-peer relationship with people that own timber lots.
Sharing people's insights and people's experiences in terms of techniques that work, or particular service providers, or particular technology or equipment, or even sharing the equipment itself. Going in together on that can be very expensive, a lot of commercial thinning and cutting and that kind of thing. So if you can share those resources, that makes things possible for everybody that wouldn't be possible for any one individual.
Well, it's not only with the advice that I pick up maybe in just casual conversation, but my current forester, Jeff Williams, and I here just last week were over at a property here in Baldwin where SWOME, Small Woodland Owners Association of Maine, had a field exhibit at one of my neighbor's woodlots, and got to talk with some other foresters and some loggers, and a lot of ideas about how one lot might vary from another in terms of the issues we would have with it.
Where your property sits as part of a larger whole is of huge importance. You can only do what you can do with your several hundred acre plot or less. The ecology of the land doesn't confine itself to property boundaries. So it makes a lot of sense, both in zoning, in long-term land planning, and then in choosing, what to do with your individual property, to look at it all collectively. Look at what makes sense for land use in various places. If everyone thinks collaboratively about what a total, community landscape looks like, and what's optimal for making, bringing out the best in everybody's property, given all of the, various potential competing uses, you get a whole that's much larger than the sum of its parts. A way to enhance the beauty and the longevity and the health of all of the properties together. So it makes absolute perfect sense to think of it, to the fullest extent possible, from a community standpoint, or a collaborative.
In general, I think Baldwin is a good place for a woodlot. Much of the area is wooded. Some of my neighbors have extensive acreage, and it's a place where there seems to be a lot of interest in forest management. I do see some emerging problems as to the age of the current ownership, how it's going to be handed down, whether there will be another generation that wants to maintain the same general conservation type forestry. I don't think there's any real guarantee that this will continue to be as heavily wooded area of Maine as it is right now.
That brings up the reason as to why we own this land, although my wife says no more investing, getting into our mid-60s here and trying to figure out how we're ever going to retire. But this land, we really want to buy land that will stay in the family for a long period of time. My roots are here in Hiram. My distant ancestors came here in the late 1700s, 1790 or so, and purchased land, and we still own a small parcel over on the Ossipee River that was an original purchase in 1790. This land wasn't in the Wadsworth Grant, so-called, that my great-great-great-great-grandfather purchased in 1790, but this is in something called the Waters Grant in the 1700s.
I think that it is essential that land, particularly like this, be preserved, just because once it's gone, it's very, very difficult to reclaim. So what's there, it's essential to be preserved, particularly in sort of large contiguous lots. So whether your traditional inheritance path is the best avenue to that, I don't know. I think what's most important is that the existing or the current steward of the land keep it managed, keep it sustainable, keep it open, keep it preserved.
My feeling about State of Maine foresters is very good. I mean, we have a history of where they were actually right there on the land with me, planning out what I needed to do. And even in this stage of evolution, their accessibility, maybe not what it was first hand, but for information and help with your planning. And I know there's a lot of interest in succession, not just in terms of the forest itself, but in how you hand this down and maintain your land in a working forest situation.
It's just the connection to the future, that she will have this. And knowing that she loves it so much. Even though she lived most of the year in western Pennsylvania, she always thought of this as home.